Nearly a year after being convicted on federal charges in New York, and several weeks after receiving a 30-year prison sentence there, former star R. Kelly, now on trial in his hometown, facing a slew of yet more federal charges. Jury selection has begun, is now underway. For some perspective on what Mr. Kelly faces, what this trial will look like, we want to bring in former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti and former candidate for state's attorney general. Mr. Mariotti, we appreciate you, a friend of the stream, joining us today. Give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of the charges. What is R. Kelly facing here?
Sure. So he is facing charges relating to the creation of child pornography, plain and simple. Those are very straightforward charges that can be difficult for the defense to overcome. Obviously, a lot of jurors aren't going to like those. He's also facing some charges related to the obstruction of justice in his prior trial back in 2008. If you remember, that was a state trial in Circuit Court of Cook County that he was ultimately acquitted there. Similar type charges relating to, the abuse of minors. And the allegation here in the federal case is actually that he was essentially obstructing justice by bribing witnesses and so forth.
The big crux of this case harkens back to the 2008 state case where R. Kelly was basically charged and accused of having sex with a minor. There was videotape of him allegedly engaging in sex. R. Kelly, 30 years old at the time, the alleged victim, no older than 15 years old. There's an allegation. This case is not an allegation, but this case is really about that old case. Did he pay off the victim, right, to win an acquittal in 2008?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. There's multiple charges in this case on a variety of matters, but a big portion of it is whether or not he was obstructing justice in that prior case, which I think was a savvy move by my former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office, because they've essentially taken a defense talking point, which is that he was acquitted on a previous occasion, and essentially now they're making that part of their own story. Instead of just putting that off to the side, they're taking that on and saying, we believe he obstructed justice. And if they can prove it, that'll be a challenge for Mr. Kelly's team to overcome.
So take us inside the courtroom a little bit, to the judge, senior statesman of the court. What do we expect to see from him? How is he going to play this?
So Judge Leinenweber, I've tried many cases in front of, multiple cases, including some pretty substantial, what I thought were high profile, nothing like this, what I thought were high profile cases. He is very permissive to the defense. He's going to let them get their story in. He's going to let them do what they want to do. He very much wants to move things forward, so he's not going to let this trial drag on. He's going to cut off people who are taking too long. He's going to want to keep the trial going. Jury selection will go rapidly. And he's also somebody who I think ultimately is a good draw for the defense here, because I think he's not a draconian sentencer or anything along those lines.
R. Kelly's defense team includes Jennifer Bonjean, a veteran litigator. She's represented Bill Cosby, Gangster Disciples boss, Larry Hoover. She's not afraid to really go after it in the courtroom, right? Really kind of get close to the line, if not cross to it. It's a pretty good choice by Kelly. I mean, he needs someone like that, does he not, in his corner?
I think so. I think he would also have been well served to have somebody who's more of a veteran of that courtroom on the team. I think if in a different world he would have had that. But look, she's certainly very well qualified, and I think an aggressive defense attorney is necessary here. I think there's multiple aggressive defense attorneys on the teams here, and I think it's going to be a lot of fireworks as a result.
One thing you talked about is Kelly is being charged with basically two co-conspirators here. So you're going to have the prosecution, you're going to have three defendants, all facing charges. So three defendants, one courtroom, one jury. How is that going to play out?
So it generally plays out one of a couple of ways, right? One way is everyone's on the same page. All the defendants are echoing the same themes and are, they're basically putting themselves in the same boat. Here, and in a lot of cases, you have finger pointing, which makes the trial much more interesting because I would have to believe if I am representing one of those other people in the room, I don't want my client to be in the same box as R. Kelly. I want to try to point the finger or distance myself. And I know that, some of those defense attorneys for the other co-defendants are very creative, very aggressive lawyers. And I would be very surprised if they did not have a very aggressive defense that essentially pointed the finger at R. Kelly.
And that could really turn into something. And the Dirksen Federal Court building is usually a pretty staid, pretty quiet place, but it could turn into quite an event here. R. Kelly, despite his legal challenges, despite convictions, despite years and allegations that have haunted him now for decades, he has his extremely staunch supporters who will follow him. They will be at the courthouse. They'll be in the courtroom. They'll be live tweeting it. Adds a whole new element. How will that be handled?
Oh, it's going to be, I think it's something where you're going to see courtroom security playing an important role. There have been other trials. I had a trial I was in where we had somebody live tweeting, and that was a lawyer who ended up getting disciplined as a result. So I would not be surprised if there's potential action by court security or by the court itself if there is activity that is either unauthorized recording of the events, or, for example, threatening a witness or an attorney, or doing anything that is disrupting the proceedings. I mean, one thing about Judge Leinenweber in particular, I mean, he is a very, as you pointed, senior statesman, very experienced trial judge. He's a no-nonsense kind of person, and I don't think he's going to like people disrupting his proceedings or certainly wasting his time.
So R. Kelly, he has hit a long legal road. Of course, sentenced already to 30 years in prison on racketeering and sex trafficking charges in New York. He is appealing that. But now comes this trial, possibility of decades more behind bars. And then after this trial, there's going to be possibility of 2 more state trials, one in Cook County, again, for rather old allegations, but they say, new victims, if you will. And then potentially a case in Minnesota, state court case after this. How does this all play out? I mean, it looks like he is going to either spend the rest of his life in federal prison or spend the rest of his life in a courtroom.
Yeah, I have to say, Brad, what I would have expected after that first trial would be what I'll call a global resolution of the matters ahead of him. I mean, in other words, I would expect his legal team to try to reach out at least to the Justice Department and then have them try to coordinate with the state authorities and say, look, we want to just plead guilty and have all of this in one courtroom and get one sentence on everything and just give up. Saves him money and gets him some certainty. That did not happen here. It could be because, for example, the Justice Department was not interested in that they want to make sure that they get their additional trial here. It may be that they did, that Mr. Kelly was not willing to waive appeal or something along those lines. But the long and short of it is now, I think the Justice Department is getting itself an insurance policy. That New York case was unusual. It's a RICO case, which is very bizarrely charged. If that gets overturned for some reason in appeal, this case, which I think is actually a stronger case on paper, is going to still be there as a backstop. And then also, Mr. Kelly, it would be currently, I think, getting out in his 70s, and he could still live a life outside of after that sentence. It's potential here that there could be a consecutive portion of a sentence that would make it more likely he would perish behind bars.
How do you see this one playing out? Looking at the charges, looking at how the courtroom is set up, who the prosecutors are, who the defense is. How does this play out for R. Kelly, and then how long?
I would be very surprised if Mr. Kelly is not guilty of some charges here. And really, from the perspective of the defense, a conviction on almost anything is still a loss because it's yet another felony conviction and another sentence. I think it's more of a question regarding the co-defendants. I don't know. We don't know. The public doesn't know the evidence well enough to know there, but I think there's a better shot for a co-defendant to say I was lied to by R. Kelly, he tricked me, or something along those lines, than it is going to be for R. Kelly, because some of those charges are pretty straightforward: creation of child pornography and so forth.
Renato Mariotti, former federal prosecutor and former candidate for state's attorney general. We appreciate you joining us on the stream today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will, of course, keep an eye for today, the next several days, weeks, however long it takes, on the R. Kelly trial. R. Kelly now on trial here in his hometown. More federal charges in Chicago.